Hello everyone, Reginald Scott here. Welcome to the video. Great to see you all again. And today we're going to be talking all about Fizik Argo saddles. But before we begin, please do me a massive favor and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell and share with a friend. All that good stuff. It would be greatly appreciated. Okay, Argo saddles. They are the newer generation of Fizik saddles. And there's a little bit of confusion about them because, as you can see, even though every single one of these saddles on the table is different, they all look kind of similar. And I think it can be very confusing, or I've noticed it is very confusing for my customers to tell the difference between them and also to decide which one to buy. So, as I have a bike shop and as I sell Fizik saddles, I thought I would do this video today to try and explain some of the confusion away. Okay, but before we even look at the Argo saddles, I think I need to give you a bit of Fizik saddle background. I want to first show you the older generation and explain those a little bit so that you get a bit of context and understand where Fizik are going with their saddle range at the moment. Now, some of these might be familiar to you, perhaps not this design because these are for tests for bike fitting, for example, but the shapes might be familiar to you. So what we have here is, over on this side, we have the Arione, which is also referred to as the snake saddle. In the middle, we have the Antares, which is also referred to as the chameleon. And then right on the end, we have the bull, or the Aliante. Aliante, it's kind of quite a nice word, rolls off the tongue. So these were the original kind of Fizik road saddles, and obviously think something that strikes you straight away is how narrow they are, how long they are, and how they don't have holes in them. Now later on, Fizik did release saddles with a pressure relief hole in them, but when they first started producing them, they were very basic like this. Now these are all regular size saddles. Actually says here R3 regular. But they made a larger version as well, just for people who were a little bit bigger or had slightly wider hips. Now, another thing that's interesting about these is you match them to a customer based on flexibility. So what we have here is actually, this is a handlebar box, but I've removed the handlebar just so I can show you this. What we have here is all the saddles. Look, so we've got the snake here, the Arione, and you can see the dude that they've put on the box is able to bend all the way down and touch his toes. Now that's me. I am extremely flexible, I'm quite lightweight and have relatively narrow hips. So for me, this saddle is absolutely fantastic, and I actually have this saddle on all of my bikes now. Every single one of my bikes has an Arione saddle on it. If you're a little bit less flexible, but you can still get kind of below your knees, then the Antares is a good option for you. It's still flat, it's still quite flat like the Arione, but it's a little bit wider, and so it drops off the edges a little bit less aggressively, whereas as you can see on the Arione, it's very narrow. Not much there to sit on if you don't have very wide sit bones, and if you're not flexible, perhaps it would put a little bit of pressure on your perineum as well. And then I don't have any perineum trouble, but some people do. Perineum is it's the soft tissue between your legs, okay, just behind your ball sack, basically. And when you go out riding, if your sit bones, this is representing your legs, by the way. If your sit bones are sitting on the saddle, your perineum is basically resting on top of the saddle. And for some people, that can be very uncomfortable. For me, I've never had any issue with it. For some riders, they'll never experience perineum trouble, but for other riders, it is a problem. So that is where the pressure relief channels come into a lot of modern saddles now. And then finally, we've got the bull, which is the Aliante, which I love to say, such a great word. And that one is for your least flexible rider. So if you struggle to even get past your knees when you bend over, I know some people who can't even get that low. This is a better option because it is much more curved, as you can see, and it's a lot wider as well, so it's a lot less aggressive and harsh. This was the previous standard of saddles, and that's how we matched customers with their saddles. These saddles that I'm putting in front of you right now are all Arione saddles, okay? This is an Arione, this is an Arione, and this is an Arione. they're different levels. This is called an Arione, or I guess you could call it a classic. This is the oldest Arione version, and it's also the cheapest Arione version that I personally sell. As you can see, the bottom is made of plastic, not carbon fiber. The rails are basic metal. And what you notice about this one is it's actually a lot more curved. As you can see, look, there's very little flat surface on this. It's a lot more curved than this one, which is the R3 version, which is the one higher than this one. You'll notice it's much flatter than the Classic. See, Classic is curved. The R3 is flatter. The R1, which is the next saddle above this one, which I have on many of my bikes, is identical to this in shape. Okay? And then the 00 here, Arione 00, this is the absolute creme de la creme top Fizik saddle you can buy. 00 is their top level. All very high quality carbon fiber monorail. So it's not even two rails attached to the saddle. It's a single carbon fiber rail that goes all the way around. If you notice, this is even flatter than the R3. I mean, it's flat, almost flat as a pancake, this one. And you'll also notice it's wider. If I put the R3 on top, as you can see, the 00 is wider than the R3. So much so, in fact, that when I tried the 00, I could feel my legs rubbing on the sides here, which I could never feel on the R3 and the R1 version. So what's weird about the older generation of Fizik saddles is, depending on how much money you spent and what materials they were made of, they actually changed in design. So that is weird to me about the old saddles. Depending on the level, they change design. It's almost as if it's a different saddle. And that's always bugged me about the old saddles. Let's push the old saddles to the side and look at the new ones, because everything has changed. Let's have a look at the Argos. So what is this one here? We've got a Vento, 140mm Vento Argo. This one is a Tempo Argo 150. Stick that there. This one is another Vento, but this is a 150. So we've got a 140 Vento, a 150 Vento, a 150 Tempo. This one is another Tempo. This one is a 160 Tempo. This is actually an R1 version of the saddle, so a higher level than these ones. And then I have this, which is a 00, and this is a Vento 140. So this saddle is the same as this one. And the first thing to show you actually is that when you spend more money with the Argo series, should I say, and you get the higher end saddle, the design is extremely similar. Like, the overall shape of the saddle is very, very similar. There is slight construction differences, obviously, because the lighter weight version, they're trying to cut more material from the saddle. But the channel size, for example, is basically the same. The pressure relief channel is basically the same, bar that little piece of plastic there. The size is the same. The overall shape is the same. The padding material is extremely similar. It might not be the same. It might be a little bit more flex with the R5, but they're very similar. Length is the same. You know, as I say, the design is extremely similar. Okay, so both of these are the same saddle. They are both Vento, and they are both 140s, but this is the lowest end saddle, the R5, and this is the absolute top of the top 00. Let me weigh these for you for a second, just to show you weight differences with the Argo series. Right, this is the R5 Vento 140 Argo, and it's 238 grams, not bad. Here's the 00 in the same size. 143. Okay, so quite a big difference. All right then. Okay, let's talk about these saddles. I can move the 00 away for a moment while I talk about them. So these 4 sizes and shapes are all of the Argo series. Now they obviously do them in 4 different levels, should I say, R5, R3, R1, and 00. The only differences between the levels are the materials. So with the lower end saddles, you tend to get metal rails and plastic bodies. With the higher end saddles, you get carbon rails and more carbon in the shell. Okay, so you just get lighter. That's the only difference between the levels of saddle. Between the shapes of saddle, there are subtle differences as well. So the main differences between the old generation of saddle, like this, and the newer generation of saddle is, number one, these are now all short nose saddles. Okay, so the way the trend is going now, and the trend was basically started by Specialized with the Specialized Power saddle. The trend is going towards shorter nose saddles. This was to get around a UCI rule about the distance from the tip of the saddle to the bottom bracket. The Pro Tour teams wanted to shift the riders forward to get them in a more aerodynamic position. And so by cutting the noses off the saddle, or making or designing saddles with a shorter end to them, they could get them closer to the bottom bracket without contravening any UCI rules. However, these shorter nose saddles do have some perhaps subtle advantages to some people. That being that with a shorter nose saddle, you can sit further forward. They tend to be more comfortable to people maybe with less flexibility, and their compact design and wider backs tend to be, fit a sort of a wider group of people, really. The Specialized Power saddle has been extremely successful and very, very popular. And so Fizik and other brands have tried to copy their design. I say copy, sort of following their footsteps, but there are some quite big differences between the Fizik Argo and the Specialized Power. I'll go through those differences right now. So the Fizik Argos are lighter for less money. So if you buy the Specialized Power saddle, you'll pay more no matter what level you buy at. Like, as I say, with the Fiziks, they go R5, R3, R1, 00. Even if you buy like the top of the range Specialized carbon saddle, it will still be more expensive than the Argo, and it will be heavier. Okay, so that's one subtle difference. The next difference is all of these Fizik saddles are made in Italy. I have been to the factory. I have seen where they're made. So these are all made in Italy, all made in Europe to European, Italian standards, whatever that might be. All the power saddles are made in China. So basically you're paying more for a heavier saddle, and it's made in a cheaper country that can afford to pay their workers less. So really you're getting a great deal when you buy the Fizik one, if the Fizik one works for you. And the physical differences is the Fizik one is a little bit longer than the power saddle. Okay. And another thing is the power saddle, if you look underneath, the shell of the power saddle goes all the way to the outer edge of the saddle. So the pad material all the way to the edge is supported by a hard shell. With the Argo, you can actually see here that there's a cutout on both sides that is flexible. This is flexible rubber supporting this part of the seat area. And so what that means is when you're sitting on the saddle and your leg is going backwards and forwards like this as you're pressing on the pedals, when your thighs press up against the saddle, it's actually got a soft area where you can press against without digging into your legs. Whereas the power saddle, as I say, is plastic all the way to the edge. So if your legs are coming back and hitting the saddle, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. Whereas the Fizik one, they've thought about that, and that's why they've cut this section off a little bit to give a bit more flexibility and make the saddle just a bit more comfortable. So I think that's a nice feature, to be honest with you. So slightly longer, bit cheaper, lighter, and tiny bit more comfortable, in my opinion. The 4 saddles that you can choose from with the Argo series are 2 Vento and 2 Tempo. Vento in Italian means wind, And the Vento saddles are designed more for your competitive racer type cyclist in general, but there are some exceptions depending on the person. But generally, this is aimed more to your competitive cyclist. And the Tempo, okay, is aimed more towards your endurance cyclist or your leisure cyclist or somebody, maybe your touring cyclist, okay? So think long distance and endurance with the Tempo and think racing with the Vento. And so the differences between the sets of saddles are based on those two divisions. Okay, now let's talk about the differences between the two Vento saddles. The only difference between the two Vento saddles is the size. Okay, so as you can see, this one is a 150 and this one is a 140. They only come in those two sizes, 140 and 150. With the Tempos, the only difference between the two saddles is one is in 150 and one is in 160. So again, the size between the two saddles is the only difference. And the reason why the Tempo comes in a slightly bigger size and the Vento comes in a slightly narrower size is because a faster rider tends to put less weight on the saddle, okay? So if you are pushing really hard on the pedals in a race, you're actually lifting your body weight off the saddle. And so you actually require less surface area to support your body. Okay, so your sit bones are pressing down on the saddle less, you don't need as much surface area to support you, and therefore the racing saddles are slightly narrower options than the endurance saddles, because the endurance saddles, as you ride, you're more relaxed, more of your weight is pressing down on the saddle, and so Fizik have given you a wider surface area to spread that load, okay, because you're going to be pressing more on the saddle for a longer period of time, whereas a racer might be on their bike for a relatively short period of time in comparison, and they're also pressing much harder on the pedals, so they're lifting their body weight off. That is the theory behind the sizes. Also, heavier riders will obviously prefer bigger sizes, and lighter riders will prefer smaller sizes. Now, when we're fitting these saddles, let's put them to a side for the second and show you something else. We use this thing here. Now, this is actually the lid off a chair that I have in the shop. This is something I had to buy from Fizik. And this is part of the Fizik Argo fitting system. Okay, so basically what it is like a gel pad. I remember I used to have a mouse mat back in the 90s that kind of felt like this. It's fun to play with. You can draw things in it. And basically, at the shop, when you go to the shop that sells Fizik saddles, if the shop is doing a good job, they should have one of these, simply because here in Brunei, I have very few customers because it's a very small population, and yet I have invested the money in one of these things. So if you live in a bigger country like the UK or America, your local shop is probably catering for way more customers than I am. So really, they should have invested in one of these. What you do is you sit on this thing, and your sit bones will press into the material. Okay, so you sit there for a few seconds, and then when you stand up, it will basically tell us where your sit bones are. And you see the measurements under here, the little numbers. We can add those two numbers together, that we can get the width of your sit bones, and then with that width information, we can match you to a saddle which is going to support your sit bones. It's no good obviously matching a customer with a saddle that is not wide enough to support their sit bones, okay? So that is why we have the different sizes of saddle. So even if you're a racer cyclist, right, a competitive cyclist, and you would have thought that you'd have gone for a Vento, if your sit bones are really wide, we might end up matching you with a Tempo, okay? Because the Vento is not going to give you the support. That's what I was saying earlier about it really depends on the rider. I know competitive cyclists that end up on the Tempo and are very comfortable on the Tempo, even though the Tempo is supposed to be for the more endurance rider. Okay, let me get rid of this thing because that's basically all I have to say about that. Let's talk about the differences between the actual saddles themselves. Now, they have, between the Vento and Tempo, they have other saddles available now. They're bringing out more and more versions of these saddles, and the only differences are the type of cyclist that they're aiming at. So they've got one now for gravel riders, which has got a filled-in pressure relief channel with like plastic like this, just to stop the mud from coming through and staining your bibs. Which I like, because one thing I've always hated about pressure relief channels, and why I go for saddles that don't have one, is when I'm riding in wet weather, I hate that jet of cold water that your tire throws up and goes right on your crotch. I really dislike that. So I've always been anti pressure relief channel for that reason as well. But if you need a pressure relief channel and you don't want to get wet, maybe you live in the UK and you go out in the rain a lot, they now make a gravel version of this saddle. It's identical in every way, except this section has got basically a guard on it to prevent that water from coming through. But it's also got an overlapping slit in it like this, so it allows air to come through, but it doesn't allow the water to come through. It's quite a nice design, actually. So there you go. Just a slight difference with some of the saddles they now sell. You can also get these in different colors. You'll notice here that all the R5s have got the Fizik logo printed in paint, and the surface is completely smooth. With the R3 and the R1, they have a different surface. You see the R1 here has got this kind of golf ball effect surface on it, and the logo is in black in the middle. But like I say, the actual designs of the saddles are basically the same. And then with the 00 version, this is how you tell if someone's spent loads of money without looking underneath their saddle. You can see it's kind of got this almost like wood grain effect to it. Yeah, it kind of looks like cut wood. Interesting. And the logo is not printed, it's embossed in the saddle. Not embossed, actually, it's the other way. It's reverse of that. I don't know what the word is for that. When you press something into something, not push something out. So there you go. So it's permanently there. You're not going to rub it off, unlike the painted version, which might fade with age. As I was saying before, differences between the ventos and the tempos, other than the width, because most of the difference is the width. You'll notice the channel at the back of the vento is shorter and narrower, and the channel on the tempo is wider and longer. So this one has a wider, longer channel. This one has a much narrower, shorter channel. And then on the nose of the saddle, you'll notice that the vento is pointed down. The end of the saddle seat curves downwards like this. And then with the tempo, it's like a chisel, and it comes up. So it's much flatter at the end, and the chisel nose comes up. So those are the subtle differences between the saddles that denote them as vento and tempo. They do look very similar, and that's why I made this video today, because it's a little bit confusing. You've got a line. Now this line is when you're matching up your saddle and your seating position. That is your center line, and that allows you to put your measuring device. I use a mobile phone app with a spirit level on it, and I place my phone here at the front of the saddle with the back of the phone just above that line, and that allows me to angle the saddle just right. This saddle, when you mount it on your bike, if you're doing it yourself, hopefully the shop will do it for you, but if you have to do it yourself, you want to mount it with this surface here as level as possible. So from the side, if you've got a spirit level or a mobile phone app, I actually think the mobile phones are better because they sit perfectly flat on the nose of the saddle. That line there is kind of like your balance point where you tip your saddle. You want the saddle as flat as possible for the front end. You notice the back kicks up slightly on the vento, and then on the tempo, it also kicks up slightly, but a little bit less aggressive. Okay? That is how you set this saddle up. Now, I do have some customers that after using the saddle for a little while, they did that and tipped the saddle up slightly. They say it works for them. Interesting thing is, if you tip up a solid saddle like this, usually I would recommend you tip it down slightly. I have my saddle tipped down quite aggressively. I have mine tipped down 2 degrees, a little bit more maybe than 2 degrees, not quite 3, but definitely a strong 2 degrees down. This one also should be mounted completely flat when you start trying the saddle. And then, as I say, you can tip it as you like it. With these ones, if you tip them up, they get really uncomfortable because they put additional weight or pressure, should I say, on your perineum. It becomes very uncomfortable. So these have to be kind of either flat or tipped down. With the Argo series, I found quite a few customers that after they've been using it for a while, they tip it up slightly. And because of the huge pressure relief channel, it doesn't put any pressure on their perineum, their soft tissue, and so they can get away with it. And they prefer to use it that way. I have not been recommended by Fizik to mount it that way, but like I say, some customers do, and they're happy doing that. Personally, I wouldn't. The prices are different between the Ventos and the Tempos, even on the same level. So the R5 Ventos are a different price from the Tempos. Let me just check what the difference is. Okay, so the price difference between the Ventos and the Tempos, the Ventos, interestingly enough, are 163 Brunei dollars, based on the Fizik recommended retail price. And the Tempos, even on the same level, R5, are 146. So the Tempos, the wider saddle that I would have thought had more material, is cheaper than the narrower, less material racing saddle in exactly the same level of materials. Okay, so these are both R5s. The Vento is more expensive, the Tempo is less expensive. If you can work out why that is, let me know in the comments below. I have absolutely no idea why that should be the case. But there you go, folks. Thank you for watching my video on Argo saddles. I hope that was useful. If I've missed anything, I'm sure I have, please do let me know in the comments below. And if you have any questions, you want further information about these kind of saddles, also let me know. And as always, folks, when you're out riding, whatever you're riding, please do stay safe, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye-bye.